Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining today's session on the promise of emerging innovative carbon credit project types. My name is McKenzie Smith. I'm an analytical team manager at the Climate Action Reserve. I oversee our agricultural protocols and also support our industrial protocols, leading the development of a protocol for low carbon cement currently. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to a great discussion. I'll start off by allowing our panelists to quickly introduce themselves. So I'll turn it over to Hans first for an introduction.
Yes, thanks, Mackenzie. Hi, everyone. Hannes Etter. I'm the Associate Director for Biochar Strategy at Southpole, which is a global carbon developer, usually based in Zurich, but I enjoy the nice weather at the West Coast the recent days. Yes. Happy to be here. Trained geographer by heart, and now been working in the carbon space for quite some time now, and I'm looking to explore together with you the emerging project types that will all keep us busy, hopefully, in the next 20 years.
Thanks, everyone. Zach Eyler with Ruby Canyon Environmental, a two-sued company as of recently. Happy to be here. I'm vice president at Ruby Canyon, overseeing all of our validation and verification activities. We are a VVV accredited for lots of different programs and sectors, voluntary and compliance markets, and we're complete work throughout the world, and especially across North and Latin America. Thanks. Great to be here.
David LaGreca here. I am Voluntary Carbon Market Services Director for EcoEngineers. So EcoEngineers is a global decarbonization company focused on biofuels, crediting, and over the last year we've grown out a voluntary carbon markets consulting practice. I spent 5 years with Zach and crew working as a validator and verifier and taking that information and kind of flipping it over and developing projects and helping finding new creative pathways for credit generation.
Okay, well, thank you all. We have an excellent panel and already interested in the discussion and preparing for this today. So we'll kick things off with a pretty general question to get us started. With carbon markets expected to significantly grow in the coming years, what are your thoughts on new offset project types and which ones do you see as being the most promising and why? So I think, Hans, you plan to kick us off, and then we'll see who else would like to chime in.
Tough responsibility, but I'm happy to take it up. I think if I look at the way that Southpole operates, we're working with clients who need to compensate their emissions, and we also need then to satisfy their demands and raise the respective credits. What we see increasingly also with an emergence of the net zero discussion, we see increased demand for removal credits. I think this is basically where we think there will be the most dynamic development within the carbon markets. I think we already have a good track record and tool set available for emission avoidance, but what we see is needed and is currently also increasingly developed are removal certificates. I mean, if we look at the dynamics that we have seen in the biochar space as one of the key removal technologies that's emerging, we already see that now that the demand for credits far exceeds the supply. Southpole is currently a member of the CCS Plus initiative, which looks at numerous efforts for carbon capture and storage and or utilization. So also there we think that there will be more protocols coming up because basically all the companies that one day or one time hopefully will have achieved their net zero state will continue to require removal certificates. However, I think another point where we see that there's a lot of demand both from the buyer side, hopefully, but specifically also from the project side, is the certification of co-benefits. Especially in the nature-based solution space, we see that the win-win solution that the carbon can bring needs to be somehow quantified also outside of the carbon world. When we look at water credits, when we look at biodiversity credits and certification frameworks, and we know that there are now, with the recent COP of the CBD, there has been a stronger push towards a commercialization of that good. But what we need in that space is also a commodification. So basically, and I think this is where, especially in the biodiversity space, this is where the funding has come short because there was no potential way to commodify this value. And I think this is where we see now linked to carbon, we see an increased uptake. I'll leave it there because otherwise you might lose your points.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Hannah said, and I sort of to step back at a high level, I don't think I want to focus on any kind of one specific technology or type, but I did a catalog sort of the big four registries in the current methodologies that are under development, and there's over 40 new methodologies that across sort of the big four registries that are currently under development. And that's not even, including, I think, probably other ones that are not on the list officially yet, or even off registry, which I think we're going to talk about, a little bit later. So there's a lot. I think it's, I would say, probably in the history of the market, it's probably the most, methodologies that have ever been under development at one time. Which is great, because that's what we need. We need new ideas and foster that creativity and creation of new concepts. I think it's always been a struggle, I think, for us and probably many in this room, that we've all gotten those emails and calls with people with new perspective ideas. Hey, I got this idea and I'm going to create a carbon credit, right? And how do you handle that? What do you do with it? And sometimes we there's really interesting ideas out there, sort of wild ideas, and how do we handle that influx of requests? And I think, we joke about it a lot, and, if you're the one who reached out to me about solar panels on the moon, sorry I didn't get back to you, but hopefully you're not in the crowd. But no, joking aside, I think I've sort of come around to the fact, because we never knew really how to handle it, that we need that constant innovation and that constant creative thinking in our space. Even if, again, there's a lot of methodologies under development right now, and I think we all know that not necessarily all of them are going to be really successful in the end. Maybe not, they're all going to be large credit generators. But I think we're in a case where, in a time where we all know we need to do as much as possible, as soon as possible. So it's worth taking the effort and the time to try to develop some of these more emerging methodology concepts, because some of them might hit and they might be significant, credit generators and lead to, significant emission reductions. So I think it's a good split place we're in. So, make sure you answer those emails and inquiries from people with new ideas and concepts. And if not, just forward them to David, and he'll take care of them. And then I guess I'll sort of switching topics. Hannes mentioned the removals focus, which we all know about, and I did want to make a comment on that. I think, I understand why companies are focused on removals and what's driving that and what is leading them down that path. I will say that I struggle a little bit with the lack of focus currently on short-lived climate pollutants specifically, which are by and large avoided emissions. But if we're talking about, again, that we need to do as much as possible as soon as possible in the next decade, really, or less than that by 2030, in terms of getting the biggest bang for our buck, in terms of really trying to act quickly, I mean, there should be a significant focus on short-lived climate pollutants that are high GWP gases. And those are avoided emissions, right? And so they're not, maybe they don't need to be, if they're not at the top of the list, they should be at the top with others and in the discussion with the removals. I think that definitely needs to be a focus. And so for these emerging methodologies and technologies, there is a lot of focus on removals, but I really believe that avoided emissions related to short-lived climate pollutants should be part of that discussion.
I'll completely second what Zach just said at the end there. I think we need to have a tandem push for innovations and moonshot technologies and manifesting the technologies we know work, and earning and kind of creating the economic structures that facilitate the growth of BECS technologies and reforestation and the other innovative approaches. But we do have a lot of low-hanging fruit that is overlooked. Capping and flaring, generating electricity from landfills and other methane sources is one thing that the market is totally undervaluing. Removals credits are justifiably more expensive at this moment because they're a hot topic, and supply and demand is definitely encouraging that pricing to drive in a more financing in that direction. And I think that needs to be done simultaneously with the drive to capture and avoid the emissions that we can before it's too late.
Yeah, well, thank you all for those insights. I think that's a great segue into what we were thinking for a second question. You mentioned, avoided emissions versus removals and sequestration. Obviously, I think we all see a theme and a trend towards, removals. Maybe from your opinion, as you see this shift, what are some of the both opportunities but challenges or barriers with that? What are your thoughts there when it comes to benefits versus risks? Whoever would like to answer first.
Okay, yeah. To me, maybe start with the risk. Maybe start with the negative points. I think basically for the market, that's one of the key risks you have already mentioned. First is the shift away from necessary avoidance, and I think that's basically also where we in our, maybe as a project development sourcing, in our sourcing strategy, we see the highest value from the removal credits because the market value is much higher, but also coupled with the whole discussion that we currently see about the avoidance space and the nature-based solution, this could be a potential shift away from necessary avoidance that we still need. I don't think we'll solve the climate crisis by only focusing on removals. We will need the avoidance part still, and this is why everybody is excited, justifiably, for removals. We need to make sure that we either maintain those avoidance projects and we continue to channel finance towards those projects, even though if the carbon price might be lower there. However, I think with the focus on removals and the increased price, we now have an opportunity to bring in those fruits which are not that low-hanging to achieve those more hard to abate emissions. And also with new industries partners. I think especially looking at carbon removals and embedding into products, we see again the biochar topic, which you can put into concrete, offers us the opportunity to widen our partner spaces, to approach new industry partners, and then also facilitate more stakeholders and thereby also more capital into the whole carbon markets. I think another interesting space which we see is the blue carbon world, which in the past has been kind of neglected. We're focusing a lot on terrestrial ecosystems, but now with a focus on mangroves, but also with an increased focus on seagrass sinking, there is going to be more and more innovation within the removal space, driven by the money, driven by the interest, and also from the capital markets that are more and more seeing the removal credits as a long-term asset that they could develop.
I think the structure of the supply availability of credits is gonna shift quickly, and removals in particular. Right now, like biochar is king, and that's by tonnage. We've probably all seen that report for removals to date, and it's an astonishingly small number in total, kind of dominated by dominated by biochar. I think that's gonna quickly be overtaken by bioenergy, carbon capture, and carbon capture more generally speaking. So I think that's gonna be one major shift. There's the risks with new project types is a lot of the unknowns. We don't know what we don't know. So to what extent can we accommodate for those risks via monitoring, reporting, and verification strategies? And the questions like that are kind of topical and timely, I think, because if we don't have an approach to these new technologies for how to bring them to market rapidly, then we're gonna miss a window.
I strongly agree with what you said, and especially if you look at the risk and unknowns. You mentioned the 40 new methodologies that we have, and as we all know, we heard in the last plenary session yesterday that we're all gonna do mistakes, and I think this is very crucial when focusing more and more on removals, which still put carbon somewhere and it's gonna be stored, and I think it will become more and more important for us to have a broader and deeper perspective on what these methodologies and new technologies will actually do. Because we will make mistakes, and some of those 40 methodologies that are floating around there might be good, some of them might not be good, and I think this is where we also need to make sure that we as project developer and trader take up a stronger responsibility in looking at how do we store carbon. The whole discussion about agriculture, the permanence of the soil carbon that we build up. This is another example which I think we need to be more responsible in looking at how we deal with removals. And something that I would be curious about is, we as project developer, we're always happy with those new 4D methodologies because it gives us more tools in our toolbox. And also gives us more projects. How's your perspective as a VVB body to those new methodologies? Because at the end of the day, you are going to be the ones that need to look at all of these projects and figure out new validation protocols.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's hard, especially, you try to be an expert in all methodologies, but if there's 40 new ones, it's pretty difficult to be an expert across the board. Yeah, I think it's important to understand like the role of what a VVB is doing. I think it is misconstrued sometimes, especially in some of the reports that come out in terms of what our role is when we're validating and verifying projects. When we are assigned to that engagement, we have a set criteria that we're going to follow to validate and verify a project. And usually that starts with the methodology itself. And so any kind of new methodology, that would be the number one piece of criteria that we're going to follow. And then there's the program, documents and standards on top of it. But when we go to validate and verify a project, we're following that methodology as our roadmap in terms of what we're confirming. We're not at the same time assessing the methodology itself. And that's very different. I think it sometimes gets misconstrued. If there are, if there's improvements or areas in the methodology itself that could be flawed or could use improvement, it's not within our purview as a validator and verifier during an actual project validation to assess the methodology simultaneously. That's not our role. And so I think it is important, especially for these new methodologies, like Hannes said, that, given their uniqueness, there's going to be improvements that are needed over time. When you take a methodology off the shelf and then the first project that goes through validation, based on our experience having done a lot of these for new methodologies over the years, there are always changes and things that come up that need to be corrected, fixed, improved. And I think if you look at the methodologies and protocols that are out there today that have been around for a while, you don't see a lot of version 1.0s anymore. There's a lot of version 2s. CAR's landfill gas protocol is version 6.0. And that's good. That's what we need. We need continuous improvement because there's going to be, things that need to be revisited along the way. And I think especially for these new methodologies that are employing, again, innovative technology where the science is rapidly changing. There's new technology being employed. That needs to become, I think, not to put more burden on the programs and registries, but there needs to be a really defined and continuous improvement process on these protocols and methodologies to capture those changes and to continuously improve. I think one thing that we all need to realize is that uncertainty in our marketplace and in our world, it's always there around these methodologies and carbon credits. You can never fully remove uncertainty regardless of project type. All we can try to do is to mitigate that uncertainty through, rigorous review of the methodologies, a standardized process for validation and verification. So we just try to decrease that uncertainty, but regardless, it's always there. And I think we just need to live with that they will be, undoubtedly some mistakes that occur, and there could be, but the main point, which has already been raised, and Hannes said it again, we just need to continuously improve, revisit the methodology, to incorporate the best science and practice so that we're, continuously improving and getting better.
I would add on to that we need to educate the community here and the public more generally that just because something is iterative or we find errors, that is part of the process. The scientific process necessitates that we incorporate learnings along the way. And trying to combat climate change is nothing but a scientific process. This is a long-term experiment that we're all involved in. And if we completely shoot down a new approach or even an existing approach that we're attempting to modify, that does not make for a positive movement in this market. I think it's really important to kind of disentangle the the notion that there is a set of quality. Quality is not perfection. Quality is a spectrum, and it is a targeted end. It is not something that we can achieve one day, and if we ever say we have, we are fooling ourselves, and I think we need to kind of just look at it from the continual improvement standpoint.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, everyone. I think, what I'm hearing from all of you is that there are some opportunities for avoided emissions that maybe aren't on the top of the list but deserve to be, but that removals aren't going away, and that they're the hot topic. And, there are obviously complexities with that. And to your point, David, how to do that in an iterative process and not lose an opportunity while embedding new and evolved science along the way. I think one area that definitely comes to mind as being most complex is permanence when it comes to removals. So my next question for the panel is, what are your thoughts on how we can overcome that today, or what new technologies and opportunities are coming down the pipeline that will make that easier from a registry standpoint, from a verification standpoint? Start with you, Zach.
Well, maybe not specifically on permanence, but because we've done a variety of methodology and protocol assessments, and just at a high level, these, the challenges around, I think, new, because they're so novel and unique, and a lot of these new technologies and methodology ideas and concepts, when it comes to the classic components of any protocol or methodology, I think there's maybe less risk potentially on areas like eligibility and additionality, and oftentimes that's because it's such a unique idea or concept that it's first of its kind. No one is doing it, and so not that it would be automatically additional, but there's, I think, less risk around those kind of components, which historically have been really big focuses of a lot of scrutiny on a lot of carbon offset protocols and methodologies. But the difficulty is the sections and the focus of permanence and the quantification aspects. A lot of them would require modeling, which is obviously extremely complicated at times. I think also assessing leakage and what that risk is like, and what the right amount of value for leakage and how it should be handled is always difficult with these methodologies. So I think it's those are the aspects when we assess kind of an off-the-shelf new idea that are really the ones that are tough to walk through and get good certainty around how it's quantified. I guess a solution on the permanence one specifically, I guess I don't have, but maybe Hannes has one.
Okay, if I would have a solution there, I'd probably not be sitting
Yeah.
here, but somewhere swimming in a very large swimming pool, not working anymore. No, I don't have it, but I think what my interest or my appeal would be to focus a bit more on to question what we're looking for when it comes about permanence. Because we see from a lot of our buyers that then suddenly try to set permanence as the premium, and suddenly we're talking about permanence durations of 800 to 1,000 years just because someone thought this is more important or this is better than a carbon credit with a permanence of 100 years. And at the end of the day, we need to figure out what are we actually looking for with new methodologies, and how do we structure also the story around permanence. We just heard the IPCC report coming out this week, which basically told us, hey, we have a few years, so we should not spend those few years discussing if a carbon credit from a biochar project is going to last for 100, 600, or 1,000 years just to make some buyers attracted to it or not. We should rather say we figure out a credible permanence duration, which should still be sufficient to combat and mitigate climate change, but nonetheless focus on the action. And I think there are projects that are able to remove carbon. There will be probably more, which might not be aiming for the 100 years. And I think maybe also allowing for temporal dynamics to play a role. There are 10-year accounting approaches and methodologies and new methodologies coming out, which will also allow us to look on short-term permanence discussions, and also allow for short-term carbon removals. So I think it's important there for the permanence discussion maybe to take a less rigid approach and be a bit more opportunistic, nonetheless maintain a very thorough perspective here. Yes.
Yeah, I think permanence is definitely a spectrum. And trying to put an absolute value on it, still kind of a fool's errand. But I think certain project types have a very low risk of reversal. You know, carbon capture sequestration is one of those, and saline aquifers, for instance, there's a very low risk of reversal, and it's relatively easy to model plumes, and accuracy of models is always suspect, but sticking it deep in the ground where it's absorbed by a rock formation, very unlikely to come back out. I think the bigger question here is although it is a permanent sequestration, is it really a permanent solution? So like if we're going to capture carbon off of our industrial activities, we should probably make our industrial activities slightly more efficient over the long term to require less carbon sequestration, or to find more efficient utilization approaches for the carbon that we're capturing off of these systems, regardless of the ultimate permanence.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate those thoughts. I'm sure it spurred some questions from the audience for later. Kind of changing directions a little bit, and something that I think is on everyone's mind is, as these carbon markets are rapidly developing, we have a record-breaking NACW this year in attendance, and there's more and more attention on these things. Some methodologies aren't being developed, I'd say, in maybe more traditional forms, but being developed in-house according with supply chains. Often referred to as insetting, which was a whole other panel during this conference. But I think as things grow rapidly and are kicking off more and more, it would be interesting to get the panelists' thoughts on how that might work, what are the risks and opportunities with those changes and how methodologies are developed. Just some general thoughts. I'll start with you, David, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we're kind of in this space that this year, the last 12 months, I've been involved in assessing 21 different project types. At EcoEngineers, we have somewhere around 8 new methodologies or protocols in development right now, and we're actively trying to work with registries. I've spoken with every single registry here. I call and am involved in development of standards for a variety of newer and upcoming registries. We want a pathway through the established markets. And no client that I've worked with has said, yeah, I'd rather do it on our own. Occasionally that happens, but it's really a practical decision for business purposes of having like an off-market sort of credit. Sometimes it's a voluntary market, so it can be a bilateral trade, and Stripe and Frontier and Shopify and all those groups are doing a really good job right now of incentivizing companies to be developed. But we're kind of waiting and working with the traditional pathways to make it easier for these companies to go through established channels. It's kind of, there's a lot of like backroom dealing, so to speak, in carbon removals, for instance, and what we're trying to do and what I'm really hoping to do is to kind of create new standards for removals that are kind of unabashedly equivalent to every on-market approach. So as soon as they are eventually adopted by the establishment, if there is one of those things in the voluntary carbon market, that it will be readily accepted. So just developing these methodologies according to the highest scientific principles that are available, whether it's ocean-based or direct air capture or any other technological approach, and just making sure that they're going to be future-proof and able to survive scrutiny through time, and then be iterative as well. We're not going to get it right every single time, but we're going to try to put as many safeguards in place as we can, knowing what we do.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a reason why David's been so busy this last year with all those new methodologies and clients, and they're looking for a home, and I think by and large, like David said, they want to be a part of an official registry, and it just the fact of the matter is, like all of us here, we're all capacity constrained. And with the extreme growth in the market, the traditional 4 big registries just can't handle all that volume and inquiries. And so I think it's tough for companies that have, innovative new ideas and concepts and methodologies where, you have to make a decision. Should I try to go through the traditional process, but it's going to take, 2 years? That's not probably acceptable to a lot of them. And so, I think they're looking for a home, and that's just sort of the current state of it. I will say, I'm surprised. I've had this conversation with others. I would have thought by now that actually more additional registries would have started up, and we've seen some growth of new registries catering to certain types. But I think I always thought it was sort of ripe for new registries to open up and offer more options in the marketplace, maybe tailored towards specific sectors, or more unique, where maybe not as broad as sort of the big four. But yeah, so I hope people are thinking about that. Not necessarily me, but maybe some of you can consider starting new registries. I think it's needed, obviously, just to handle the help on the capacity constraints. I think there's obviously a risk because the MRV component is so crucial. If you're talking about an off registry, or not part of the traditional one, or people are doing it internally, there's obviously a risk there if they don't have a high integrity MRV system. And I think probably the intention is there to develop that. But again, it really would be in the devil in the details in those situations, in terms of how transparent it is, what is their process like, how are the methodologies being assessed, how are the projects being validated and verified, what does that system look like? And I mean, again, there's a risk there, and I think we're all very, it's always a topic of conversation now around the negative publicity that, projects and programs have been receiving. And so again, this would be, I think there's a risk there, if it's not done right and people go, do off-registry methodologies or projects, that again, we're just inviting potentially more scrutiny. And not to say that some of it can't be done correctly and done right. I just think it's a risk that needs to be considered.
Thanks. I don't fully agree with your surprise or with the lack of new emerging standards. I think if we at South Pole look at new project opportunities, and we see that especially within the last year, there's more and more dynamic within the sector for new registries coming up. And we were very happy to see that, especially in the removal space, Puro Earth is one of the leading and innovating standard and methodologies provider for removals has been ACRO endorsed, which gives us a new tool to operate within the removal space as a project developer. We see social carbon now being endorsed by ACRO, which again gives us a new opportunity and credit type to deal more looking at social co-benefits and environment. So I think they're slowly branching out, which is great, but maybe too slow if we look at the major registries and their ability to respond to criticism, to innovation. I think there is something where we, as a project developer, would like to have a bit more dynamic system, and I think the diversification that we currently see in the market will hopefully continue and give us a bit more of this flexibility. Meanwhile, I think what is crucially important is what you said, is the focus on quality, and not only on the methodologies, we've spoken about that, but then also on the standard architecture. And I think this is where efforts such as the ICVCM, which will release their principles soonish, but also then the ACRO in itself, as two of the major landscape bodying organizations, we will become more and more important to ensure that actually the standards landscape that we're operating in is currently involved, at least getting to a certain quality standard. But as you said, that is a process and not a stadium. So hopefully we'll continue to expand the quality and put in more and more guidances for new standard and standard types to be able to comply with these quality requirements. And maybe this segues back to the question that you had in the first place, which was a bit the insetting discussions. I think my wish is that coming obviously up as a project developer from the offsetting space, looking at the insetting one, I see a convergence of those two worlds, which is more and more becoming relevant for us. I think with South Pole, we're looking at a few projects, especially within agriculture feed additives, where we feel like a lot of the companies, a lot of the clients that are approaching us basically are already maybe ahead from the traditional project developer, which is coming with climate action funding for those. But basically, most of the partners that we operate there are already in that in-between zone where they feel like, hey, I've got two potential pathways to commercialize my product. What are the options, and what kind of project types can you offer? And I think there the industry, our industry, is probably not there where the demand is coming from to us, which is basically clients asking for that duality of commercialization options for their climate action. And there, we're talking about quality. I think the key point for the quality should be to make sure that these two worlds start to speak to each other in a more cohesive way. If you look at the accounting frameworks that would be there for net zero, scope 3 accounting, they are still not aligned with what we have established within the voluntary carbon markets. And I think if we want to have a cohesive move forward towards this new type of interaction, we need to make sure that these systems speak to each other. Because otherwise we're going to have always a shift to a race to the bottom, where people just rather go for the lowest threshold for annoyance from whatever standards you're operating with. And this is basically what we should, as an industry, try to avoid.
Yeah, not surprisingly, some differing opinions on a new and hot topic, which I think is great, and will hopefully spark some questions and further comments from the group here that's listening in today. Yeah, so we did want to leave some time for questions from you all, but I think to wrap things up, I'll ask each of the panelists to provide some final comments. It does say in our description that we would explore some specific topics further, so give you an opportunity to talk about any specific methodology or new technology you want to, but if not, that's fine as well. So I'll start with Hans and move down to Zach and David and just ask for any closing comments that you might have before we turn it over for a Q&A.
I knew that this place was the worst place I could sit in, because I'm always being picked up first. No, I think, yes, it's an exciting time to be in that space, because I think there's so many developments on different levels. We have the standards which are involved, we have new methodologies, we have a new commercialization pathway with scope 3. So this is basically my key message is don't get into despair about the complexities that are coming up. And I think basically what I, at least in South Pole, we try to position ourselves is that we should at least be the guidance, and we should have the specialists in our capacities to guide the clients that come to us towards the best situation that there is. Because otherwise I feel that at the moment, the complexity that the voluntary market itself has is already off-taking enough. If you add those different layers that we just touched base on top of that, the risk that might be is that people are just not doing what they could, that they're foregoing opportunities, and this would, I think, especially in the current situation, the worst type. If you ask me about technologies and approaches, I need to flag the South Pole biochar hat here, which is going to be the best technology ever. But I'll leave you to that, and rather hand it over to Zach.
Yeah, maybe just more of a high level, like a comment or observation. Having been around, I guess, the carbon world since 2008, it was always like a niche market, a relatively small group of people, and just slowly moving one step forward at a time. And I feel like the last year or two, it's been great. There's been so many new people coming into our space with these new ideas and methodologies and concepts. But at the same time, I feel like it's been the most adversarial time period, I think, in our niche little world. It's a lot of this versus this versus this, a lot of criticism of different things, and not necessarily that criticism is all bad, but I do think just every once in a while I feel like we all need to take a deep breath, and I know we're all worked and have limited capacity and have too much to do, but I feel like some of that kind of commonality in our small world that we were just trying to improve slowly over time has sort of been lost the last year or two. It's become I hope we get that back and just continue to try to work together and make the continual improvements and come up with the new methodologies. And again, sort of get back to that step by step incremental improvements in progress. 'Cause I do feel like it's that kind of has been lost the last year or so. And in terms of the biochar, I guess in terms of yours, I'll have to wait until we maybe validate your project, and then I can weigh in on whether it's the best technology ever. So.
Just wait for it.
Nice. Yeah, it's kind of a similar take to Zach. The climate doesn't really care how we fix it. Right now, if we like step outside of our little niches and kind of recognize that the approaches that we're all taking are all in the same general direction, we don't really need to kick each other down. The assumption that it's a zero-sum game is relatively immature, I think, and fighting saying removals are inherently superior to other methodologies for offsetting is. I don't think that's supported by facts. The monitoring, reporting, verification, methodology development, and overall quality integrity standards are what will actually determine what kind of credit is superior and of a higher quality. So if we're not approaching these problems in a way that is cohesive and coherent, then it will become a zero-sum game. And we're not going to have any of the solutions manifest to the same degree that they would have otherwise. I think the media trash talk of particular project types is just, it's problematic, and it's fraught with half-truths. And I don't think any of us want to keep the same trends and deforestation occurring. None of us want to have unabated emissions on coal facilities. But if we don't kind of embrace the relatively controversial approaches, then we're kind of shortchanging ourselves. We don't have to agree with how they happen, but we need to take every effort we can to make it better.
Some great points, really interesting. Thank you. I thank all the panelists for your answers and your thoughts. I will turn it over to a Q&A. I think we have a little more than 15 minutes. We are recording this session, so I will repeat your question as best I can, so it's on the record, and then I'll turn it over for our panelists to provide their thoughts. So I saw a hand right in the front here first. Sure. Thank you very much. I'll repeat it quickly, and also being a representative of Climate Action Reserve, I can offer my thoughts as well. But I'll first ask our panelists. So I think generally the question was, what are the challenges when taking a new methodology to one of the registries? What is required in taking that to the registry? How does it become an actual methodology that can be used in the market? So I'll turn it over to whoever would like to speak to that first, and then maybe offer some of my thoughts as well.
Yeah, I can start?
Sure.
Having recently done the biochar methodology, just the way that, with Vera and being involved in a few other current methodology development processes, I appreciate your trust that you have in the system where you, as a methodology, will be provided with databases. You will not. So basically, what you usually do is you start with a specific technology in mind or a opportunity, and then you have to figure out how do you quantify this. So this is basically starting from scratch where you need to begin. And then obviously there are, from the different standards, they will provide you with templates and guidances, but this is more a overarching structure, but basically how you design the respective equations, how do you design environmental safeguards. This is purely up to the methodology developer. You will in the process encounter different steps where you will get feedback. either from the standard or the registry that you operate with, because they are experts. Also, for example, within the car, there's sufficient expertise for biochar projects, where you're developing the project yourself. But I think most of the expertise needs to come from your team. So, and this is something you need to consider when drafting a new methodology, that this will take a lot of resources and time. And you probably will receive a lot of pushback from whoever is going to be your standard, but also from the public consultation that will be involved. From a legal perspective, there's not that much involvement, but basically you need to be aware that whenever you publish the methodology, it's going to be public, so it's not going to be yours anymore. And I think that eases off a lot of the legal fights around it.
I would say on a mechanical standpoint, the hurdles that we encounter are proving future adoption rates of a particular approach is kind of tough to do, and it's a novel approach. There's, it's kind of categorical different types of projects and removals. For instance, there's like bioenergy carbon capture. There's ocean enhancements of various sorts. There's terrestrial. There's biomass burial. There's categorical, and some registries are looking at it in that way. But on a particular methodological approach, it's difficult to develop a methodology with enough breadth to be able to accommodate and to be able to prove to a registry that it's going to have the demand that they require to be interested in this. So it kind of gets into a little bit of, so we have, I don't just look at the big four. We're also working with a registry called Sea Capsules out of the IREC Foundation in Europe, working with Puro Earth and others. Canadian Standards Association is relatively receptive to new ideas. So basically, we kind of broaden the tent of where we try to take it. We take the approach and we break it down by what registry might be interested. Then you kind of subtract a few for timeline, because a lot of companies don't have the runway of funding to wait for a multitude of years before they earn credits, because that might be their primary revenue source after funders. And then once you do submit a concept note, it's kind of a frustrating process on occasion, because we do a very thorough scientific review before we take on any project, and then to have it go through another secondary scientific review, and you're like, okay, I already answered these questions. But it's important to have everything kicked around and repeatedly looked at. I think it does streamline the process to have external experts work with you on the process and to kind of foresee some of those issues. So having your methodology reviewed is not only a high integrity thing, it's also pragmatic, because it'll make it easier to get it accepted by a registry. I haven't seen a whole lot of legal or other kind of issues in that regard come up, though.
Well, great question, and good to hear your responses, and I would just echo that is the case from the registry perspective. You would come with a concept, and then it's on our desk and in our hands to put it through our channels and processes, and I can empathize or appreciate it feels like poking holes again in ensuring that it meets our programmatic standards and whatnot, and going through a third-party or multi-stakeholder expert review and public comment period. So there is a process there, at least for us at the Reserve. The next question, I think, was from gentleman in the back and then up front.
Sure. Mike Braun from Onyx Transition. So you guys have discussed a number of things around, we've addressed the low-hanging fruit, and so novel methodologies sort of get a little more complicated. We've had discussions of what happens with backlash when methodologies don't deliver fully on what was promised, et cetera, which is sort of increasing tension, I think, in the market. And so I want to ask of you is, what do you see as the solutions or mechanisms that might be available to reduce the perceived risk that both the standards and the buyers see as we're developing new methodologies or new projects? Right? How do we help reduce that perceived risk so that we have an opportunity to try those new methodologies?
Yes, I'll do my best to repeat your question for the record and then ask the panelists to answer. So, you mentioned that we were discussing a lot of, low-hanging fruit or abatement and then more novel removal, complex methodologies. And we also noted in the previous discussion some backlash or criticisms of that when they're not done according to those standards. So the question is, what are the solutions or mechanisms that you see to lower that perceived risk, both for the standards and the buyers and the market as a whole?
I think having incremental and pilot projects is a good way to de-risk it. So, and I think it's maybe a subtle change that could be made in the registry process for accepting methodologies would be to put them under advisement so that the market recognizes that there is some traction here, and it gives the companies that are promoting these types of new programs a little bit of certainty that it is going somewhere, and that they don't have to sling credits out of the back of their pickup truck, that they can actually, that there is something to move forward towards. I think pilot scale projects and piloting new methodologies and so you don't have to categorically accept or reject a methodology like day one, have kind of a middle ground approach. I think that could possibly help.
Other thoughts?
No, basic agreement. So I think the participation from third parties in methodology development and reviews is crucial, and I think the current standards have a process that involves third parties during the stakeholder consultations. What I would personally opt for is to continue this even after the methodology is activated, because at the moment, once a methodology is out, it will be relatively stable, and in order to readapt it or implement changes which might be necessary either because the methodology is unworkable or it just has a lot of loopholes, that's a very slow process. I think there are now coming up, there's a lot of, in the recent weeks we have seen numerous methodologies being constrained, either on the project level but also on the methodology level. If you look at the RISE methodologies, which have been issuing a lot of credits over the last year and have just now been pulled back because there were some concerns about the MRV system and the data requirements. I think these points should be, the mechanisms behind this should be a bit more open. So there should be, I don't know, could be a potential annual commenting opportunity for each methodology, or there could be an expert panel assigned to that, as you suggested, but basically to opt for continuous improvement and quality increases on a methodology level and not so much just on a broader standard level.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about, obviously the continual improvement and the different versions of protocols and methodologies. And I mean, all the programs have a process to update those, but it is probably maybe not standardized enough. And I think it makes a lot of sense, especially with the new methodologies, to maybe there's a sooner check-in on the methodology and how it's going. And I think, a lot of the programs, I think, do this anyway. When new methodologies or protocols come out, they'll often audit the first couple projects that go through. I think that's also very valuable because they'll see exactly how a project is being implemented against the methodology. And then during validation and verification, what questions are being raised or things that maybe aren't making sense. So I think a lot of programs actually already do that, but I think that's also a valuable, especially for new methodologies, to audit the first couple projects to see how they're actually being implemented. But I think maybe a sooner check-in on new projects in a more standardized method, within the first 6 months or year of being released, I think would make a lot of sense as well.
Interesting points, and timelines seem to come up in terms of revisiting and revising. So those are interesting comments, definitely. I think we have time for another question or two. I believe you had a question here.
Thanks so much. Yeah, my question is I think you mentioned blue carbon credits, which is also being touted as part of the emerging carbon credits. And but the problem is there, which I've read in several publications, is with respect to the scaling. So I would want to have your thoughts with respect to how we get the proper scaling for the blue carbon credits,
Thanks.
Sorry, I'll do my best to summarize first. So the topic is blue carbon credits. How do we get those verifiable? And some of your thoughts on that, I guess, technology versus some land-based methodologies. Thanks, Hans.
Yes. I probably need to be careful here because my blue carbon colleagues, which are somewhere out, will get very angry if I misfigure the South Pole position here, but I will try to do my best. I think generally blue carbon will be an important solution to the climate crisis because I think it's basically an untapped ecosystem at the moment. But you're right, I think the key point here is the scaling and how do you get this to scale? And I think to this, I would answer with 2 points. The first scaling is the commercial scaling, and I think if you look at the amount of funding that is currently being channeled into blue carbon, there are a lot of private funds that are putting millions and millions at the moment into kelp research, figuring out what the potential there is to develop products, but also what the climate impact is. So to me, the scaling is not so much on the commercial side, but it's more on the technical side. And there we would, on the one side, need to make sure, and this is where to my understanding, especially with seagrass and organic sinking, the problematic situation is that we don't know what the impacts are, and the science is not there yet, which speaks to me that we need to put more thoroughness into reviewing these technologies. So basically, I think the problem is we don't know where and what we should do, which probably resonates our understanding of the planet, where we have no idea what's actually in our seas. And that brings to the second point, which I think the MRV. So basically, closing the first point, we need more time. I think especially we need to make sure that within the blue space, we're not going to mess up the oceans that we did the terrestrial system. With our trying to solve one solution with the climate change, we shouldn't sacrifice the biodiversity, key point. And this brings us up to the second point, which is a thorough MRV solution. And I think there we need to scale our technologies again in order to figure out what is actually underwater. We still have a lack of understanding how the underwater ecosystem actually looking like, and we shouldn't mess with an ecosystem that we can't monitor, both in terms of what our carbon impacts are, but also what the other environmental impacts are. So this is where I feel we need to hold our horses a bit and make sure we know in which environment we can work. And maybe that's not the deep sea, but it could be the shores where we might have already a better understanding.
Great. I think we have a little less than 5 minutes, so probably final question, but I saw a hand raised there.
Hi, Alicia Butler from Brain Ecosystem. I've worked both on the methodology development as well as the product development side, and I guess I'm curious to hear your thoughts about, we've established that this whole process takes a long time. There's research, there's methodology development, there's project origination, it just takes forever. And what's the opportunity cost then of putting a lot of our resources and energy to creating new technologies and new sources versus devoting those to our current project types? And what's the balance that you see there in terms of the time that you have to slow your roll and wait to do things versus just getting moving as fast as possible?
Great question. Thanks. I'll do my best to reiterate it. So, honing in on the time required to do these new methodologies, from research to registry to implementation, and what are some of the considerations or your opinions from the panel on how to balance, investing our time and resources into new technologies or new methodologies versus focusing on evolving or scaling current methodologies, and what's that balance in your position or from your opinion? So maybe I'll turn it over to David first, or Zach.
Sure. Yeah, so I think on the scaling existing approaches question, I don't really think that by developing a new methodology, you're necessarily avoiding scaling of others. I think that developing new methodologies opens up new potentials. I mean, it adds in new risk categories for sure, but I don't think that it's one or the other. Maybe from a registry standpoint, that would be different though, because you can only register so many projects at a time, and if you're devoting half your team to developing new methodologies, that could be problematic and slow down the crediting of good quality project types today. But I don't think it's inherently a trade-off.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in an ideal world you would do both, but we all have limited time, so it's a hard call. I think. I think we need to try to do both. I guess I'll bang the short-lived climate pollutants drum again. in terms of things that we can do right now in the next couple of years that can make a immediate impact. But yeah, I think we just try not to sacrifice also the long-term vision of developing new ideas and concepts as well, if it's possible.
But it is important to add then, it is important to have that pipeline of new ideas coming in, because one of those is going to take off. We don't quite know which one, but one of these approaches is going to be very scalable, very technologically possible, and could supplant some of the existing best methodologies that are out there. Whether it's avoidance or removal, it's kind of irrelevant. Like one of these will take off, so you can't ignore and shut down the avenue to new project types.
Great. Well, I believe we're right at the hour, so good timing. I'd like to thank our panelists yet again for a great discussion and your thoughts, and for all of you for attending. Thank you.